Okay. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session on an intro to Voyant tools. For anyone who doesn't know, especially anyone who's attending who isn't from the University at Albany, my name is Kathleen Flynn, and I'm one of the science librarians here at the University at Albany. And I've also altered the settings. You may have noticed I've disabled participant video and unmuting just because I'm recording, and that makes it easier. And I've also enabled closed captioning, so feel free to hit the CC button on your Zoom screen at the bottom if you'd like to see the live transcript. So with that, we'll get started with Voyant tools, or Voyant. I think the creators pronounce it Voyant, so I'll pronounce it Voyant for them. So I'll put a link to it in chat. So Voyant is an openly available web-based text and analysis environment, which they have listed right here. It was developed with the digital humanities in mind, but anyone interested in analyzing qualitative data like text can benefit from it. As for what it can do, it does computational text analysis. So it will tell you things such as the word frequency, where the words are most frequently used, what words are closely related in the text, etc. So it sort of gives a quantitative analysis of a text document. And this is sometimes referred to as distant reading. Therefore, some limitations of Voyant are that you'll still need to do close reading separately. So Voyant can't analyze a metaphor. It can't really tell you if a particular word is meaningful in your document to you and your interpretation or anything like that. And one thing I wanted to point out before we get started is that there are two ways to use Voyant. You can go to the website, which I'm at right now, but you can also download a Voyant server and run it locally on your computer. And the help documentation, I have it here, and I'll put that in chat just in case anyone, you probably won't be able to do it now, but just in case anyone's curious. The help documentation gives some instructions for installing it. It does require Java, which is free. So the benefits of Voyant server are listed here, and the most serious one here is at the top. When you use the regular Voyant website, your data is technically saved on their server, and others could access it if they really wanted to and knew how. But by using Voyant server locally on your machine, this won't happen. So if you need to use any confidential data, such as data with personally identifiable information, Voyant server might be the better option for you. Some other benefits here include you don't need an internet connection to use it. And finally, you'll be able to analyze some larger text faster and without as many issues, because Voyant it's a free resource and it's web-based, so it can be a little buggy at times. Sometimes you need to refresh just to clear things. So let's get started. Here I am again. If anyone new is joining, it's Voyant. I'll put it again in the chat if anyone wants to go to the site. On the home page here, we see this box, and I'll move my transcript out of the way. We see the box here where we can add text. And the first things that I wanted to point out here are these little icons here. We have the help, the language, and the options icons. And these are the same icons that you'll see in other locations once we're deeper into the tool. So the help icon here is a little question mark. And I'll say that the help documentation for Voyant is pretty thorough. It's so you can check that out. The language icon here is to set the language of the user interface. So right here we see it's set to English right now. We see add text, open, upload, etc. So there are, right now it's checked in English. They do support, I think it's 13 languages here for the interface. Now, when you're using the tool itself, you have text in there. It will recognize I think, pretty much any language, most languages, but just for the interface, it will support about 13. And then finally, we have the options icon here, and this one will give some examples of the file formats that are supported here by Voyant. So we have some tables here. These would be if you're uploading an Excel spreadsheet, and that process is a little more complicated. So you'd want to go here first, and you can specify where you want it to pull your data from the table, if you have a headers row, things like that. So this is a little more advanced here. You can technically set passwords to access this, but if you have confidential data, it's really better to check out Voyant's server. Now, to use Voyant, you'll need some text to analyze, and they have a few preloaded already in the open button, which we'll look at later. But some other options, you see here, you could just copy and paste text right into this box. So for instance, I'll just go back to this page we were on. And if I just paste text in there and then I click reveal. So don't worry about what you see so far, but you see that here's the text that I pasted. So that's one option, but if you have lengthy text or something you want to save, that, it'd be a better option to save the text somewhere as a file and then upload it, which we'll see in a second. But this is something you can do if you just have some quick text. You can just throw it in there. So to get back to the home page here, up in the top, I'm going to click the little home icon. Another option, you see you can put paste URLs in there. You can paste one or more. If you paste multiple, you'll see multiple documents available to analyze within the tool, and we'll see that in a second and then a bit later. So I'm going to paste, this is the data services page on the library website. This is just the library homepage. I have them here. And if I just hit reveal. So don't worry about this too much yet, but you see here under the documents tool, I have two here because I pasted two links. So it's worth noting that Voyant, when you put a URL in there, it's not going to scrape everything from the entire website. It's just going to look at that page. It's not going to click the buttons and then go elsewhere. So it just, for this one, this was the library's homepage. It didn't, have it says here it's 406 words. It didn't find everything from the entire website. And we also see here, this is the text that it found. We have some navigation buttons and whatnot. So it's also pulling things that you maybe don't want to analyze. So one option, you could save what's on the page and clean it up a bit and then upload it, and of course you can upload an XML file. So, but that's an option. So I'll go back to the home page again. And then finally, as I've been alluding to, you can upload files. So Voyant supports a number of file types, such as PDF, XML, Excel, HTML, and then plain text .txt files. But the most important thing to remember when uploading a file is the text needs to be OCR ready. So that stands for the optical character recognition. And it basically just means that it's machine readable. For instance, some digitized texts, let's say if you scan some handwriting, it may or may not have been made OCR ready when it was digitized. Usually if you can highlight the text and then paste it and it's text, it's probably OCR ready, but it's something to be aware of before you attempt to upload files, because if it isn't OCR ready, then Voyant won't be able to read it. So the most ideal file types to upload will be those plain text files, or the ones that have that extension .txt. And some good places to find those, I'll put those in chat. If you don't already have your own, you have Project Gutenberg, which we'll look at in a second. HowDoYouTrust, the Internet Archive, And these places will usually have free to use and most of the time copyright free plain text files that you can easily download and use. For instance, I'll go to Project Gutenberg here. I can browse for some books, but if I just search for Thomas Paine's Common Sense, I see it right here. So I have a few options to read it or to download, and I see here this plain text file. So I could either right click, I could either save this. If I open it up, I see the text here, and then I could save this. And then when I save this, it will be as a plain text file. And I don't know if I think you're seeing it here in Notepad, but let me know if anybody can't see it. But this is the file it gave me, and on most computers, you should have some text editor. This is Notepad. You might have Notepad++, or if you're on a Mac, you might have text edit, something like that. Whatever allows you to open the file. And so I see here, though, Project Gutenberg has some intro text here. They also have some license info at the end. So this is text that I probably don't want included. So I could just delete this and then save it again. And I saved it as a separate file. So I have the original separate. And then I could just upload this one. So I'll go back just to show an example here. And you don't have to do that, by the way, if you're trying to follow along. Sorry, I should have said that, because we'll be playing with some other files here. But just to show how to upload, I have the .txt file here, and it'll just load. So you see here in bold, this was my file name, and then here's the text. So that's that option. So I will go back to the home page. I want to get started by using the preloaded texts that we saw there. So I go to open here, and Voyant has 3 options so far. They may add more. So they have all of Shakespeare's plays. They have all of Jane Austen's novels. And you see here, these would be corpus. So you'll see the word corpus a lot, and that's just a collection of texts that you're analyzing. And then they also have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein here, and this is just one document. This isn't multiple texts. So we're going to start there, because when you're analyzing one document versus a corpus of multiple, it'll look a little different. So we'll start with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I just hit open. So this is what we call here the default skin. And when you first look at it, it's a little overwhelming, but once you get the hang of how things work, it's fairly user-friendly. So we see there are 5 panels here, and some of these panels have more than one tool here by default, and we can change these tools, what's in each panel, and we'll look at that later. One tool that's loaded here by default in the middle, which we saw earlier, is called the reader, and this is just your text. So it shows you at the top here, this is just the file, and this can be useful if you want to see more context for a term or a sentence that you're analyzing. We see here at the bottom this bar, and we'll see this change a little bit later. But as we scroll down, more will appear, and you see we're working our way through the text. So this is the beginning, this is the end, and we're going through it. And then down here in the lower left, we have these 3 tools here by default. The summary tool will show you a few things. You have the average words per sentence. This might be useful, as we'll see a little later, if you're looking at comparing multiple works by one author or authors in different eras, things like that. And we also see, of course, the total number of words in the document, the total number of unique words. We see things like vocabulary density, which would just be the ratio of the number of words in the document to the number of unique words. The readability index, there are a number of those. This one, I believe, it looks at things like the word lengths and sentence lengths and just tries to measure the complexity of the text. So I think in this index, this 11, this would be interpreted as like an 11th, 12th grade reading level, something like that. And then we have most frequent words in this corpus, but when we have multiple documents, we'll see this show something a little different, the most distinctive words unique in the document compared to the other documents. So we'll see that a little later. And then we saw the documents tool here right next to it. And because we just have one document loaded now, we just see one, but earlier we saw two, and we'll see that again a little later. So this shows similar things. We have the word count, the unique words in that ratio, and then the words per sentence, average words per sentence. So this tool doesn't look that interesting now, but you'll be able to do more with it a little later. And then finally, the phrases here, we have some common phrases in the word length. So you can search for a word in this box here and see if that term appears in any phrases frequently. So it's making some suggestions here because these are some of the top terms that are found. So if I just click night, now I see some of the phrases that word appears in. And down here, I see it appears in 16 different phrases. So for instance, this phrase occurs twice and it has 8 words in it. And of course, we can sort by these. The trend here, you don't see anything. You'll see something there when we have multiple texts here. So that's phrases. Now up here, you probably saw the word cloud. I think most people have seen word clouds before. This is called the Cirrus tool in Voyant. And, you know, word clouds are not the most useful things out there, but they can be a nice way to quickly show a viewer some of the commonly used words. And what this is doing, it's showing the 55 most frequent terms, and that 55 is just the default. And we see the slider down here, terms, we can adjust that. Looks like from 25 to 500. So the important thing to remember with word clouds here is that the frequency of the words is depicted with size. So the bigger the word, the more frequent it is in the text. The colors and the positions of the words are not significant. So we notice there when I change how many terms are showing, it changes the orientation here. If I change the size of these panels, which you can do, I can adjust the size. It'll change. If I just refresh this whole page, it'll change. So only the size, the only thing that matters is the size of the words. So I see here the word man. If I hover over it, you notice it's telling me this word appears 133 times in this text, whereas, you know, friends here appears 56 times. That's smaller. Now, you may have noticed if you're looking at the words here that some words, because these are the top words that appear in the document, you don't see some words that you might expect. Words like, you know, the, and, you know, things like pronouns and prepositions, things like that. Those we call stop words. And by default, Voyant excludes them from their analysis. So the assumption there is that words like that are super common. You know, you'll have the word the, you know, when we see here, it's over 4,000 times in the document, that most of the time you're not going to consider it significant, you don't really care. You don't want to analyze it. So it excludes those by default. It assumes that you'll see them as clutter. But you can change that, and we'll look at that. So every panel here, you recognize some of these buttons. All of the panels here will have these 4 buttons. They all work the same. So this first button, this is the export button, and we'll look at that in a second. Then the next one is to change what tool is here in this panel. So we're in the Cirrus tool right now. And then we have the options button, which we saw before, and then the help button. And the help button's really nice because as I just hover over it, it gives me a quick explanation of this tool. And then if I were to click it, I could go into the documentation page on their website, which will be more thorough. So if I go to options, for the Cirrus tool here, I have a few options. Number one, I can change the font there that's displayed, the font family. I can change the color palette. So this is the default one, but they have a few other options here. But then you could edit it yourself if you click edit list. So I could remove some of these. I could just add my own. I could just clear them all and then make my own. And then if I save it, then I'd probably want to change this name. And then I could have that new palette. I'll just leave it at the default. Categories here we'll look at a little later. And then we see here stop words and whitelist. So the stop words, it's detected that my text is English. So it's using the English list that they have prepared. And they've uploaded stop words lists in a number of languages here. But you can select none. So for instance, let's check out if I turn that off, what happens to my word cloud. So we see, and the, etc. So I'll go back. I'll turn that back on, but right next to it, you see edit list. So here's where you could look at that stop list. And this is a good idea for a number of reasons. Number one, you may look through here and, maybe you see a word that I don't know, I see the word whole here. Maybe in your text, that that word's actually significant. So you could just remove that word from the stop list and save. If you see some words, I think I remember in that word cloud, I saw the word shall a lot. That was a really common word. Maybe I don't care about that word. I could just add that to this list and then save it. And sometimes, and this is where Voyant can be a little buggy, sometimes the stop words list, you update it in one tool and you have this box here, apply globally. So it should apply it to anywhere here, every other tool where you can use a stop words list. Sometimes it doesn't and you have to go in and do it again. It's a free tool, so it's web-based, so it can be a little buggy, but something to keep in mind. And then the white list here, this is the opposite of the stop words list. So with the stop words list, we're saying don't analyze these words. Whereas with the white list words, if I go to edit list, when I add words here, I'm saying only analyze these words. Ignore every other word. So you may have a situation where you want to do that. Let's see, I think that's it for that. So let's go to the export button here. So the first thing I can do if I just export right away, and I'm in the Cirrus tool here, so it's just gonna give me that visualization in a new window, which you may like, especially some of the tools can be a little messy, so it's nicer to see them in a new window like this. But some other options here, I can get a little bit of HTML code that I can embed in a website, and that, for instance, this word cloud would be interactive. And then I also have a reference here. If you want to cite this, you have some options. We'll look at the notebook there later. And then because this is an image, I can save this if I just want it to be not interactive. I could save this. So I could either have the code here and embed it, or here's the image. I could just right click and just save the image or copy it. Let's see. So that's enough for right now for the series. So right next to it, we have this terms tool. And, oh, and I didn't get rid of I didn't apply my stop words list. So I'll go back to that and confirm that. Okay, so this is maybe a little more useful sometimes than the Cirrus tool, because this is the same information. So remember, this is the word cloud is showing me those 55 or however many you said most frequently used words. That's what the terms table is showing me. But so I have the count here. I can sort these. If I click the little plus sign here, I can see some more info, which you may also have in other tools, which we'll look at. So this is the term man here, its distribution throughout the text. Some of the collocates here, the words that appear in close proximity, some of the phrases it appears in. So this will be the terms, and as we just saw, minus any of the stop words, of course. So at the bottom here, I have a search box here. So I can search for words here. I can search for multiple, but and I can add some other words. So like the word monster. So one thing we see here, this little question mark, you see it's giving me some of the search syntax that I can use in these search boxes here. So for instance, if I wanted to search for a phrase, you know, it has their winter coat in quotes, in quotation marks. I wanted both of those words together as a phrase. So it's giving me some of the options there. But when I see here, when I type in monster, it looks like the word monster itself appears 31 times in the document, and monsters appears twice. But then we have monster here with an asterisk. And so this is acting as kind of a wildcard truncation symbol here. So it's saying search for any term where, you know, that begins M-O-N-S-T-E-R and then anything after it. So that will include monster, monsters, etc. So that includes those, it's 33 for the count. And as we saw here, the search bars boxes appear in a number of tools. We saw it down here. It's in the reader. And they act the same way. Now, many of these, let me X out of that, I'll remove that. Many of these tools are compatible with each other, so they'll interact with each other. So for instance, if I click the term man here in the terms tool, watch what happens to the, where is it? Let me try to get back to the, watch what happens when I click the term man. So we see here it interacted with the reader tool. It's highlighting the word man. And we see now in the box below, now we have this little spark line that goes through this. So remember, this is the beginning of the text. This is the end. So this is basically showing me the frequency of that term throughout the document. And it's basically the trend line we see here, just spread out much more. And it updated this trends tool, which we'll look at. We see in phrases. So not every tool will interact with every other tool. And, you know, there are more that the terms tool may interact with that we just can't see here because I don't have them loaded or whatnot. But let's see, in the reader tool here, if I click a word, we see that also updated the trends tool, the context tool down here, and phrases. As well in the Cirrus tool, if I click a term there, same thing, it's updated in a number of these tools to reflect that. And so there are others that will work that way as well. So the trends tool, let's go to that one next. This tool is very useful. You'll probably use this one a lot. So what you see here, it's splitting the text, and this is just one text, into 10 equal segments by word count. So we see here 10 segments, and that 10 is the default, and we can change it. And if you have multiple texts, which we'll see a little later, this will look differently. And the default here is also it's showing the relative frequencies of the term. In this case, we just have this one term because I clicked it in the word cloud. And if I were to, when I have more terms here, I'll show you what I could do there. But so the relative frequency, this is the percentage that this term appears in this segment of this text. But I can change this to show raw frequency. So that's just the word count, the number of times that this term appears in this segment as opposed to the percentage. So to do that, let me check. I want to start with resetting this trends tool just to get back to what it normally is. So again, we have the 10 segments. These here, these are just the top. These are just some of those common, the top words here. And so you can, of course, click them to remove them, to toggle them on or off. You can add more words here if you want. So again, I could search for that monster asterisk that we looked at before, and we see that it edits that. You could add more as well. So let me go to the options because, and remember, these 4 icons appear in every tool here. So when I go to the options, so just like the Cirrus tool, we have the option here to change the color palette. And we have the stop words list and categories, which we'll look at in a second. So here I can change the number of segments that are displayed. And I can also change relative or raw frequency. So I'll change it to raw. And so now it's telling me here in this 3rd segment, this term, or either term, monster or monsters, occurs 4 times. And then let's see, do I want to export this? I can export this to a new window. So then I can, let me go and I'll change the segment. So we go up to options and I'll increase the number of segments here. I'll change it up to 20 and we'll see how this changes. So it looks a little different when you have more segments, because remember the segments is just taking the whole word count and just cutting it into 10 equal bits by word count. So you may notice as you play around with it that the trend, changes a bit. So play around with that, play around with the raw frequencies versus the relative. I also should note down here, the default here is this line and stack bar, but you have some other options. You can have an area chart or just a bar chart. The show labels here. Well, it's not showing it in this. Let me show the labels here. Yeah, the show labels may not be that exciting, might be a little cluttered, but that's an option. Okay, so at this point, now that we've looked a little bit at one document, I want to switch over to one of those corpus that has multiple text. So I'm going to go back to the home page. And I want to look at Jane Austen's novels. So this is another one of those preloaded. So I go to open and just select Austen's novels. So what I notice here, things look a little different. In the summary tool here, there's a lot more going on. We have 8 documents now. There are 8 novels. And it's showing me stats here, like instead of just showing the total number of words. And in this case, the total number of words is all 8 documents combined. But here they are individually, and they're ranked here, the longest and the shortest. And then we have that same things, the vocabulary density, the average words per sentence, the readability index, but they're ranked highest to lowest. And then the most frequent words here in the corpus, this is for the entire 8 documents combined. But then here we have, for each of them, the top unique words compared to the rest of the corpus. And then in this documents tool again, now we see all 8 documents, and they just happen to be sorted here in chronological order. You could modify that. You could add or remove documents and rearrange them here, but they're in a nice chronological order here. And again, we have the word count for each, the unique words, that ratio. So I see maybe as she continued in her career, maybe she used fewer unique words. But it looks like here the average words per sentence, it's pretty similar throughout her career. So this may be a little more interesting if you have multiple documents here. So again, like I said, when the tools, some of them can interact with another. So when you have multiple texts, this is where this tool can be useful, because if I just click Sense and Sensibility here, it's now updated a few. So first of all, this reader tool now, you see this bar here looks a little differently. Before it was just sort of a solid blue purplish bar, but now we have, as you can see, we have 8 boxes here. These are the 8 documents, and the heights here represent the size. So the first 2 here were the smallest, and then they get longer. And so the reader tool operates the same way. You're just reading the text here. So when I clicked on Sense and Sensibility, it took me to the beginning of Sense and Sensibility in the reader. And it also here updated the trends tool. So this looks like what we saw before. We see it's been divided up into 10 equal segments. And these are the top terms in Sense and Sensibility. But if I go and click Reset, we see it looks different now, because what it does by default when you have multiple documents, instead of dividing it up into 10 segments, it divides it up by document. So each of these segments is one of those novels, is a document. So there are 8 here. So if I want to just look at one, like I did before, I could either click it here in the documents, or, and I'll reset again, I could drill down within this tool. So to do that, let's take, since it's staring at me here, this Mr. So this is the term Mr. and its relative frequency within this segment, which happens to be Pride and Prejudice. So if I just double click this point, it gives me 2 options here. I can either search for this term within all of the documents here, or I can search for terms within just that one document. So I'll click Document, and we see it takes me back to what we're used to and what I would get if I just clicked it here in the document tool. So another thing we notice that's different here, some tools like the Cirrus tool, we see here there's a new box here, a new button called Scale. This will let me, if I look at documents, I see all the documents here. So if I want a word cloud for Sense and Sensibility, I can do that. We'll see that, you see it down here, we'll see that button in a few places, and that will let you change, similar to what we were just doing, change what documents you're including. So over here at Trends, I wanted to look at this document terms tool, which is loaded by default next to it. So here again, we see the scale. So this is because I have Pride and Prejudice selected. But if I go there and I make all of them show again by clicking all and OK. So the numbers here, this column, the numbers are the IDs here for the documents. So number 6 there, that's Emma, and so forth. So this is similar to the terms tool. So we have the terms and the count. Here now it's also the relative frequency per million here, we have the trend, this term throughout that document. There are some other columns here, some other options. If I hover over header here, of course you could sort, but if you go to columns, there are a couple of other options that aren't included by default. So that's an option. Now, while we're on terms here, I want to go back to categories quickly. So if I go back to the terms tool here. So if you're doing analysis, a common analysis you may want to do is called sentiment analysis. And that's where you're determining how positive or negative a text is. Unfortunately, you can't really do that in Voyant. The closest you can get now is they've added some categories. They have positive and negative categories. And we saw here, if I hover over the question mark, I get some syntax I can use. But another one you can use, if you use the @ symbol, and their documentation will have information about this too. If I search for @positive, I'm searching for the number, this is the count for how often words, and in this case, I think it's for the entire corpus, all 8 documents, words that are in that positive category appear, how frequently. So it's, almost 33,000. And I can do that for negative as well. But then I could look at, if I do the little up arrow caret and then @. So now I'm searching for, of those words in that positive category, how often do each of them occur? So these here are terms that are in that category that happen to appear and how often they appear. So I'll do that again for negative. Now what we notice here, the top one here is miss. So miss, of course, can be a negative word, you missed the bus. But if you're familiar with Jane Austen here, miss here is probably just referring to names, Miss Dashwood, etc., etc. So I can go into the categories there and, number one, look at it to see what it's considering positive or negative, and edit that list a little bit. So to do that, if I go to the options here, and we have categories, and I go to edit. So it's showing me terms here, and these are the positive and the negative terms. I can make my own category if I want. And you can remove some terms. So I think that's enough about that. But I do want to, let's see, I can also search for that in the document terms tool. So if I search for the same thing, the negative terms, again, I see here miss, and remember these numbers here, these are the IDs of the document. So 6 here is Emma, etc. I see miss a lot, so that's something to think about. Poor here. And if I remember, the tools can be interactive. If I were to click one of these, I see here that we see the sparkline here throughout all of the documents, but it updated this contexts tool, which we haven't looked at yet. So that's a nice segue. So the context tool here will show the usages of a single term here, in this case, miss, since I clicked it, and the context within the sentence throughout the text. So this is a tool where you probably don't want to add more stop words because you want to see the full context. You want to see those stop words here. So yeah, as I look here, I see a lot of names. This is one that isn't, but a lot of names here. So that miss there is probably not intended to be negative. I could also search here. So if I search poor, we have that up there. And I believe, let me check the scale, because I think this might just be searching. I'll make sure all of them. So for poor here, I see the context as it appears in sentences. she seems to use this word, you know, poor so-and-so a lot. So that's a trend with her. So that's something that's interesting. Here, the context slider here, this will change the number of words on each side of the term, in this case, poor. And the expand slider, if I click this plus sign here, this is just giving me more context within the text. So if I use this slider, that changes how many words are in that expanded view. And the number here is just the number of entries here in this table. So if I sort here, it's sorting by the last word, the word nearest to the term. So here we have A. So that's something to consider. And then right next to it here, I'll address bubble lines. Bubble lines is kind of it can be interesting, but it can get messy. I mean, you can see here it's already a bit messy. And I'll export this to a new window. So this already is pretty messy. And this is just with one term here. I have miss, although miss is, of course, one of the most common terms here. So this is showing me, it's similar to trends. So the bubbles here are the frequency of words, and it's, you know, segments of text. So this is the beginning and this is the end. Although it's not just 10 segments here. The granularity at the bottom, this slider, this lets you adjust how many segments you have. The number at the end here, so the term miss appears 57 times in the whole document. And then in this segment, it was 3 times. So for instance, I can search here. I can search for marriage. And, you know, see, once I have even 2 terms, it's pretty messy. I can click this button here, separate lines for terms. So, but that, again, it's quite messy. But if I go up here to miss, I could hide or remove that. So now I just have marriage. So this is interesting. I can see that certain documents like Northanger Abbey, I don't see the term marriage a lot. Whereas, you know, in Pride and Prejudice, it's a little more common. So this tool can be interesting, but it can just be a little messy. So now I quickly want to show the links in the collocates tool. So the links by default is up here. And this is basically a collocates graph, which I'll the collocates tool I'll add in a second. So links here, we're showing, if you remember, these are some of these top words here, Mr., Mrs. said. So the terms in blue, these are those common words. And then they're linked to the collocates, or the words that appear in close proximity to them. And the context slider here, I can adjust how many words it's considering on each side. So what I can do here, I can grab a word, I can just drag it off to remove it. If I right click on a term, I can remove it. I can also right click, I can fetch some more collocates. So you see they popped up. I could also double click on something to fetch some more. So they popped up. And then if I centralize, it'll show me everything. So it'll be quite messy here. And then the collocates tool, I think I'll add that here with bubble lines. So to add a new tool, and you can do this in any panel, you go to this little Windows icon. So this will replace the bubble lines tool. You can only have so many tools loaded, but you can always replace them. So there are a lot of other, you can see here, a lot of other tools we didn't get to. A lot of them, though, are in beta. They're kind of experimental, and they're not going to be the most useful. For instance, Dreamscape here, it's a little buggy, but you can check those out. So I want collocates. So this is again showing the terms and then words that appear in close proximity. So here I can change with the context slider how many words it considers. So if I change that to 1, we see here Mr. So we see a lot of names, of course, and how often that appears. And of course, here we have the scale button, so I can change what documents I'm looking at. Yeah, so a lot of names here with one, but then we have good deal, so things like that, and we can adjust this. So let's see. Oh, I didn't address the correlations tool. That's another default one. So that's looking at the correlation between two terms. So here it explains the correlation coefficient it's using. So as this approaches 1, it means that those terms are they positively correlate, so they're linked. They'll rise or fall together. If it's near 0, they're not really there's no real correlation. And if it gets to -1, there's a negative correlation there. So one rises, the other falls. And as I said, there are a lot of other tools. If I quickly pop the Dreamscape tool in there, and I'll export it here so you can see it bigger. This is looking at any kind of location name that occurs, and it's trying to plot them. But it's really buggy. For instance, if you have London, now in this case, London, they probably meant London, England, but here it has like London, Ohio. And you can change it. So I changed that, but this may not be super useful yet, but as it said, it's experimental. So there are a lot of other tools like that. And the last little thing I wanted to point out, and this is something new that they're exploring, they have, I think they pronounce it spiral notebooks, but it looks like spiral notebooks to me. If you're familiar with Jupyter notebooks, it's similar to that. So let me go to a tool here, like a trends. So we saw it here when I went to export. It was under here. I could export into a new spiral notebook. So what this will do, you'll be able to have a web page here with a mixture of text and then code, and you can run the code and produce those visualizations, and they'll be interactive. And then you could, this does require Java, by the way, which is free. And so you could send this to somebody and they could scroll through it. So for instance, here, if I hit run, it's going to produce that graph. I have an example here. This is one that the creators made, so it's a little more complete. So you could use this for instruction or like a report. So you have some text and then your visualizations. And I'll put that link. I have the link to that example. I'll put that in chat if you wanted to check that out. And they're all on the documentation as well in their documentation. So with that, I think that's about it for now. We're low on time, so I hope you have enough to continue on your own. And feel free to ask any questions with the few minutes we have, and email me with any. But as I said, their documentation here, where we were before, is very thorough. And thank you for joining, and the recording will be sent out soon. See, I wasn't checking chat closely. I don't see any questions. Oh, yep, no problem. The recording should be sent out today, probably. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I think I'll stop the recording.